on the streets of London. I'd like to bring solidarity from my own union, PCS, to celebrate the idea of international working class solidarity, not as some vague utopian dream, but as the most powerful antidote to the new consensus from Downing Street, the studios of News International, and the international equity and bond markets, who demand that working class people must pay the price for this economic crisis. This is a crisis, we should remember, that has been caused by a free market capitalist model, a financial bubble built on credit and reckless speculation and greed. The massive bailout to the speculators of over £1 trillion of what we find was our money, which caused the budget deficit, has now become the pretext for the biggest attack on public services and all the social gains won by the working class in Britain on a scale that even Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair could only dream of. A former Labour politician, Nye Bevan, once said the Tories never talk about class war because they're already too busy practicing it. We're here to challenge the deception that any cuts are needed. PCS believe that at a time of recession, it's not cuts in public services you need, but public investment. Britain is the 6th richest economy on the planet. What about collecting the tax for 120 billion lost in uncollected tax and tax avoidance and tax evasion by the super rich and the FTSE 100 companies? The £7 billion paid out to bankers in bonuses over the New Year period would pay for 25,000 nurses, 1,500 doctors, 20,000 teachers, 100 new school buildings, 20,000 staff to collect the tax, 20 new fire stations, 200 new fire engines, 1,500 new firefighters, 50 libraries, 50 swimming pools, and much, much more. This is before you even talk about making the super rich pay their way in society, a windfall tax on the massive profits of the banks and the supermarkets and the energy companies, a Robin Hood tax on the transactions that have gambled every day of the week by international bond markets. All of this helps expose the lie that cuts are needed, exposes the lie that this society cannot afford decent public services. This is a government that has no mandate. The cracks are already beginning to show. Let's build on the magnificent demonstration on the 26th of March. Trade unions have got to play a central role, working with community organisations, with pensioners, the unemployed, with students, disabled, community campaigns. Trade unions have got to reach out to the unorganised, to the young and those exploited on casual contracts. We've got to sell the message: every worker needs a trade union. We've got to support trade unionists taking action. We've got to defend our reps that are victimised. We've got to support peaceful protests like UK Uncut that target the tax dodgers on our high streets. We've got to actively challenge the threat to all public circus, and I hope you'll support PCS and the teaching unions and the college lecturers who are going to be balloting their members shortly for what we hope and expect will be the first wave of public sector strike action as part of the coordinated action of the British trade union movement that's going to be needed to defeat this government. And last but not least, let's raise this opportunity to talk about what sort of world we want to live in, to put an alternative to the dictatorship of the international bond markets, for decent public services, for a public funded health service and a welfare state. for tax justice, for building the homes that people need, for investing in climate jobs, and most of all, showing the solidarity with our brothers and sisters, not just in Britain, but across the planet, fighting for their rights and fighting for justice, and showing in practice that another world really is possible. Thanks for listening.
Comrades, brothers and sisters, May Day greetings from the Fire Brigades Union. And one of the things that this government is talking about doing is abolishing the bank holiday which was awarded for May Day, I think back in 1978. It's a minor thing in some ways, but it's important nevertheless, because they want to try and eliminate all memory of the idea of working class struggle from British culture, from British schools, and we need to resist that as well, because they want to con us into this idea that we are all in this together, and it's a complete and utter lie. May Day, Workers' Day, workers' struggles remind us of this. There isn't one Britain, there are two Britons. There are two very divided Britons. There is the Britain of the majority, where we struggle for our future, where we worry about what sort of life our elderly will have when they retire, when we worry about the future for our young people, we worry about paying the rent, paying the mortgage, we worry about our public services. That's the Britain of the majority. And then there is a very different world. A different world that a tiny minority inhabits here today. I don't know if people have followed this, but in Hyde Park, one person is just in the process of buying a flat for £136 million for one flat. That gives us just a flavour of the divisions that exist in our society today. And our task today, from May Day, from March the 26th and onwards, is to say that's not the sort of world we want to live in. We want to live in a world where we look after the majority just as well as we look after that tiny minority. May Day works best when it captures the mood of people. May Day's history was in the struggle for the 8 hours day, where workers across the globe got organised and said we want decent working conditions, and we'll organise internationally to win it. Well, today that agenda is about the austerity measures, because it is not just here in Britain that we face these attacks on our services, on our jobs, on our pensions, but all across the globe working people are facing exactly the same struggles. In Greece, in Spain, in Ireland. Who would have thought, however, the scale of the resistance that we have seen? Who would have thought that dictatorships in the Arab world would have been overthrown as they were over the past 12 months? Who would have thought that in Wisconsin, American working people would occupy their state capital, saying we won't have your attacks on our pensions and on our trade union rights. This struggle truly is international today. So in terms of where we can take this forward after today, after March the 26th, I've got 3 things to say. First of all, as Chris has already said, there are now likely to be strikes across whole sections of the public services, possibly as early as June. And I say to everyone here today, when people are on strike in our public services, in PCS or in education, every single one of us needs to be on their picket lines to support them, demonstrating and showing our solidarity and support. The trade unions need to organise, that's their campaign. But it has to be far wider than the trade unions. We need to build alliances of young people, of students fighting to defend education, fighting against the loss of EMA, fighting for a future. We have to link up with pensioners groups, fighting for dignity in retirement. We have to build links with local communities, fighting to defend schools, libraries and other local services. And finally, we also have to challenge the very ideas upon which these cuts are based. They tell us there's no alternative, but there is a clear class agenda behind what they are doing. It is an agenda that seeks to protect profits at the expense of the majority. They want to restore and protect the profits of the banks and of big business, and they want you and your families and your colleagues at work to pay the price for that process. And we have to say that that's not on, that's what we will be fighting. I stand here today as a trade unionist, but also as a socialist. And I think we have to say to Cameron when he talks about the big society, well, let's have a debate about what sort of society we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society that destroys the future for young people, that causes war around the world, or do we want to live in a society of solidarity and unity that looks after the vast majority? That's the sort of society I want to have, and I'm quite happy to have the debate with Cameron or whoever else about what sort of world we want to live in. They tell us there's no alternative. We've always been told that throughout history, and working people have had to fight to build our own alternative, and that's the challenge in front of us today. We carry that alternative in our heads and in our hearts. Struggle, solidarity and socialism, and for our Turkish comrades, Yatassin Bir Mayıs.